Here now, Glenn Greenwald, co-founding editor and columnist for The Intercept. It covers a lot of media issues. Glenn, why was this such a potentially juicy narrative for the media? I happily was not focusing on this over the weekend. I was with my family, but I started seeing it blow up. And I was wondering, gosh, this is really a wild story. I wonder if there's any other video. And then, of course, other video came up.
So I didn't comment at all over the weekend because it was immediately clear to me that these snippets of video would make it impossible to know with any confidence what actually took place. And maybe that's my lawyer background. Maybe it's yours as well. Even in a controlled courtroom setting where there's due process and all kinds of controls to make sure evidence is presented authentically and without distortion, it's very difficult to know who's telling the truth and who isn't, what happened and what didn't. And so when you start having this kind of trial by Twitter mob, it's just obvious that there's no way to have any confidence about what took place. Having said that, and I think that's dangerous, I do think that even the full video reveals some things that I do think are disturbing in the students' actions, even when it's true that some of the worst things said about them are clearly false. There's some of them, at least, who are doing things like mocking the Native American with tomahawk chants, mocking the way in which he was singing. You know, they were 15 years old, but at the same time, I don't consider that exemplary behavior. I think there is a question about why this captured so much media attention, and I think one of the reasons is that a lot of our politics is very racially polarized, and you can blame the left, and I think sometimes that's legitimate, but a lot of President Trump's rhetoric is responsible for that as well, and I think that's the subtext here.
Yeah, I understand that, and I appreciate your analysis because it's even-handed. I mean, thank God I didn't have video of stuff I was doing when I was 15, 16. I didn't travel to Washington. I didn't go to stuff like this, but people do stupid things. But when you think about the way that people are approaching, whether it's law enforcement, members of the military, things they say to them on a daily basis, get an inch away from their face and scream and yell and I mean, horrible things. I mean, maybe people think they deserve it. Maybe there's people they don't deserve it. But the media never, ever, ever roll with that for like a weekend of coverage. But these kids were wearing those MAGA hats, and it reminded me a lot of the Kavanaugh story. It reminded me like Georgetown Prep. They're all a bunch of horrible people. They're all a bunch of drunks. They don't do. It was that stereotype, and it's almost, Glenn, the kind of profiling that the left accuses police of doing regularly, but they're doing it. Like everybody's profiling each other, like snap judgments, without taking a breath, without saying, okay, let's look at really what happened here. And let's look at some of the background on the activist himself, who's accused other people wrongly of things in the past. But they didn't do that because it's a kid with a red hat who looks like he has a smirk on his face, so he must be a racist. That really was the conclusion by the dominant media.
I think the worst thing that you showed was the tweet from a CNN paid commentator who essentially was urging that a 15-year-old child be physically and violently attacked. I mean, that's really perverted. It's actually kind of not just perverse, but perverted to have fantasies about punching a 15-year-old boy in the face based on things that, as it turned out, there's at least questions about what he did. Why isn't that kind of incitement to violence something at least as disturbing? But again, I think the context here is really important, which is there are a lot of people in the country who are African American, who are Latino, who are Native American, who are Muslim, who feel, I think with good reason, vulnerable and attacked, and this is the context for all of these debates. Imagine, Laura, and I do think this is an important point.
What's the media's role in this, Glenn?
Well, in this case, the media was incredibly reckless, and they've been reckless in many cases in flaming it, and a lot of them even admitted that. But imagine, Laura, if this had been an elderly white priest who was leading the pro-life movement, surrounded by Black or Latino teenagers chanting, mocking him. I think things would be seen differently by both sides. So I think you're right that journalists in this case and many others wildly and recklessly inflame the situation. But I also think it's not without justification and validity that a lot of people see this as concerning behavior.
And Glenn, what about the Buzzfeed story? I've got to pick your brain on that real quickly. We're going to talk to Don Jr. about it as well. I mean, firestorm last week. Now they still stand by their story, even though the special counsel says we don't, it didn't happen.
When the history of the Trump-Russia story is written, unquestionably, one of the most shocking parts will be how reckless the U.S. media has been in their reporting. I just did yesterday the top 10 most humiliating failures, where they didn't just get stories a little bit wrong, but radically and fundamentally wrong, major stories. In this case, I think we should be a little careful with BuzzFeed because we don't want to treat Robert Mueller like this infallible deity who passes down the word of God from the mountaintop and we all just immediately accept it. But I do think that it's very strange that he chose this story for the first time to come out and say that it was inaccurate, which seems to be clear that there's something very odd going on in BuzzFeed's reporting that made a lot of people justifiably question it.
All right, Glenn, we're going to track all these stories. We really appreciate your perspective tonight on all of this. Thanks so much.
All right, Laura, thank you.